thanks to all of you. I had a bad dream last night. I had a dream that I let the band down. I was playing a performance with a band and I wasn't ready, I wasn't prepared. I let the band down. We're all in the same band, of course, right? I think that's what I was thinking about. And part of why this school is so strong is that we have not been letting one another down, right? This alumni network has been leaning into itself. We have been leaning into one another more and more and more. We're trying to add as much value as we possibly can to you and your lives. Keep the ideas flowing about how we can do that better. And of course, like any network, it's a very reciprocal thing as we lean into one another. So I wanted to give you an update on the school, on what we've been up to. One of the things that I thought I would do is give you a sense for three trends, three kind of macro or mega trends that are going on in management education, and give you some sense for what we're doing as a school around those trends. So the three things I wanted to talk about were, first of all, the trend toward learning by doing, sometimes called action learning or experiential learning. We see that in our undergraduate program, we see that in our graduate programs, no question about it. So learning by doing is one of these big trends. Second of the big trends is a trend toward what I would call developing T-shaped leaders. T-shaped leaders, this notion of a vertical segment, a segment of subject matter expertise, functional expertise, but also this breadth dimension, this horizontal dimension. What is that T made of? And what is your school's distinctive contribution to the way that that horizontal or breadth dimension is created? You could call that kind of the leadership dimension, but I'll talk a little bit about that, and I think that leads into some of the other things that we'll talk about. And then the last of these big trends, not just in business education, but in education more broadly, is of course the digital education trend, the online education trend, and I'll talk a little bit about that, because that is disruptive. There's a lot of hype around it, but it is disruptive, and it's coming in a big way, and I'll give you some sense for why I believe that, okay? So those are three big trends. I thought I would use the trends as a way to update you on the school and what we've been doing. So the first of those is the action learning or learning by doing. So what are we up to there, right? So one way to think about these trends is to think about a broader framework of what we're trying to do in management education. And the broader framework, sometimes people talk about thinking, right? Or knowing, rather, knowing, doing, and being. That modern business education is about knowing, doing, and being. It's not just about knowing. It's not just about a sage on the stage and going to the lecture and I know how to do cost accounting. That's part of it. It's an essential part. It's the traditional part in many ways. But the doing part is so fundamental, and also the being part, which starts to get into my second topic, that T-shaped graduate or T-shaped leader. The doing part is really fundamental, and we've always had a lot of that in our program. We haven't been as intentional as we needed to be. So let me give you some examples of what we're doing on the doing part, this learning by doing. And so here's a program. When I hear about or see these programs or talk to the students that are in these programs, I think that I want to be in that program. That's a I know we're doing it right when I look at something and I think, God, I'm so envious that they get to do this. So what are some of the things that we're doing? And we do a lot of these things at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level, as I mentioned. Here's one. We call it C2M, Clean Tech to Market. Clean Tech to Market is, we've got Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, which strictly speaking is not part of UC Berkeley, but it sits on the hill, basically right across the street almost from the Haas School. Lawrence Berkeley National Lab is a pure science laboratory. They do clean energy science of various kinds, very much science. We have a program where we put together 2 or 3, this one's mostly graduate students, 2 or 3 MBAs, in a team with a PhD student in chemistry, one in biology, one in engineering. So you're having to work with PhDs, and many of our MBAs haven't worked closely with PhD scientists before. And then the team of 5 or 6 goes up to Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and analyzes the commercialization potential of the research streams coming out of the lab. This was written up in the FT. It was a couple of years ago, and the first paragraph of the Financial Times article read, commercializing clean energy science is one of the hardest things going these days. At the Haas School of Business, here's how they do it. It was kind of like, oh, thank you. That was a good article for us. It was a very good article for us. The science part of why the article was so exciting is because they were interviewing scientists at the lab, and the scientists themselves were saying it is so helpful to have a view downstream because we really don't know how to think about this stuff, right? And for our students, it's like, you can't buy this. You can't get this anywhere else, right? This is not something you can get in the private sector or anywhere. Okay, so that's part of what we're trying to do when we think about the doing part, or the learning by doing, or the experiential learning component of the curriculum. Part of why this is exciting is also the human capital dimension for ourselves. So let me give you an example. A guy named Lucas Davis probably joined our school as a faculty member since most of you were there. Lucas Davis is an energy economist. He is a hot property. He is as good as it gets. He has tenure, so he's a senior faculty member. He is a dominant teacher. Great guy. Stanford GSB made him an offer a year and a half ago. Garth Saloner, my counterpart, gave him an offer that was just off the charts. Now, we have a financial model that allows me to match what was an enormous offer from Stanford GSB. Lucas and his wife went to Palo Alto, looked at Stanford, thought about what Stanford has, not just as GSB, but as a campus in chemistry and biology, no national lab. And then about a year ago, 6 months after he got the offer, he called Garth Saloner and said, I'm staying at Berkeley. So that's the kind of talent win that we, against an obviously great school, that is defining of how strong things are. We can't let down our guard. I needed a financial model. We needed a financial model that allowed me to play at that level, but we also needed a UC Berkeley that was there for us in a field where he said, no, I'm staying at Berkeley. And that was a great thing. So when I talk about learning by doing, and I talk about clean tech to market, these things are like ecosystems that capture talent, whether it's in the new student market or in the faculty market, and they keep it bound. We are a human capital organization. We will get stronger if we're winning the human capital battles against these great schools, and we will get weaker if we lose them. So this stuff all feeds on itself, and it gets very, very, very positive. So we have a lot going on in the learning by doing area. Another example is in entrepreneurship. We have Skydeck. Some of you may not have heard of Skydeck. It's about 2 years old now. It's a joint venture between Berkeley's College of Engineering and the Haas School. It is a startup accelerator. The difference between a startup accelerator and the usual term, the typical term of incubator. We've had an incubator for a long time, as you know. The incubator was mostly an office space. For those of you that used it, it was an office space. You got a team, you got an idea, here's an office, go, right? Startup accelerators are very different. It's like, no, there is some office space. It's in downtown Berkeley. It's at the top of the Power Bar building. I don't know if you remember that. It's now at Chase Manhattan Bank. But it's right across from the BART station there, that tall building, 13 floors, right outside the Berkeley BART station, the circular exit there. Go up to the top floor. Great views, top floor, right? But it's not about the views and it's not about the space. It's about the process. So in the startup accelerator, it's like, you need to have done this in 1 month. If you haven't done this in 1 month, your team is out of here. Here's what you need to do in 2 months. Here's what you need to do in 3 months. Here's a mentoring and coaching network of people in your field that will take your call. Use them. If you don't use them, you're out of here. Here's a bunch of VCs and other funders, angels and so forth. So it's a very systematic process with lots of milestones and accountability. Or again, I keep saying you're out of here, but it's really quite focused. And that's another ecosystem element. So let me tell another talent story that's related to this. Toby Stewart, I think he's the hottest property in the faculty markets in entrepreneurship. He's a sociologist. He works on network theory, networks. How do networks contribute to entrepreneurial success? He was at Harvard Business School, tenured, chaired, top of the market, could go anywhere, no question about it. And we gave Toby an offer. And he came to visit Berkeley for a year, and Skydeck was going on and lots of other stuff. And about just over a year ago, he called his dean, Dean Nitin Noria at HBS, and he said, I'm resigning my tenure at Harvard, and I'm going to Berkeley. So he is now with us as a permanent faculty member, and he's a stunningly good teacher. And again, it is how these ecosystem elements. I'm not saying it was just the experiential learning or the learning by doing part that brought Toby in, but he was very, very excited about naturally being where we are. Our place asset, right, the Silicon Valley, San Francisco, is helping us to pull the talent and retain the talent from the very, very best places. Okay, so that's experiential learning. That's one of the mega trends. All business schools are doing it. We're not the only ones doing this stuff, but we are doing it much, much more intentionally than we ever used to. And it's bearing fruit in all kinds of human capital markets and other things that matter to us. The second trend, I'll be a little briefer, is the T-shaped leaders, right? So at the end of the day, we're a general management school. We must be. How do you pull it all together? Maybe that's another way to say this, right? Is sort of, what kind of a leader or what kind of an integrative concept comes out of this when you look at it this way? And we've been thinking hard about that, so have a lot of other schools. But at the end of the day, if the top schools, and I think this is true, society needs these people to lead. Whether you're talking about our undergraduates or our MBAs or our MFEs, these are profoundly high potential people. They just are. We have the privilege of dealing with some of the most amazing people. Society needs them to lead, needs them to aspire big things, to think big, to have ripple effects in lots of ways. That's what we need. And if we as a school are going to say we educate or develop leaders, then we'd better mean it. We'd better be intentional about it. We'd better be able to say, and here's what we mean. This is what the kind of leader we want to be attracted to Berkeley. And this is how we want to develop them in these directions because we think that they fulfill these needs for us and for society. And so that's kind of putting a signature on the horizontal segment of the T, right? If this movement toward a T-shaped development of graduates, both undergrad and grad, is something that you see industry-wide. But I think schools are better, but also part of this megatrend is that schools are better at saying, here's what we mean by that sort of horizontal or integrating segment. And we've tried to do that as well. So what do I mean? Let's be a little bit more explicit. Very, very quickly, I'll give two examples here as well. I gave two examples in the learning by doing area, right? I talked about energy, clean tech to market, and I talked about entrepreneurship and Skydeck and so forth. So a couple of examples on this second megatrend, the T-shaped graduate, is culture. Let me start with culture. I mean, I hope you've all seen what we've been doing around these defining principles. So one of the things that struck me so I just finished my 5th year as dean, so it was 2008 when I got here. And if you had gone, which we did, if you had gone to our website in 2008, in July of 2008, and you looked on our website and you searched for culture or core values or principles, you wouldn't have found anything on our website. Nothing. At the same time, if you had asked employers who aren't alums, or if you'd asked any of us or any alum, does Berkeley and Berkeley-Haas have a distinctive culture? To a person, we would have said yes. To a person. If you looked at many of you do interviews for us, and thank you for that. I don't know if you know what the old interview assessment form looked like. When I became dean, I looked at the interview assessment form. And, it looked great, had all the right stuff on it. There was one line on it that said fit with the Haas culture, but it was undefined. Now, the interview assessment form is very clear about the defining principles. So we did not create that culture. We codified that culture, right? We just put to word stuff that's been here for a long, long time. And I'm not going to walk you through all of that. But, part of it is we, at the time, saw a lot of distinctiveness in our culture. It was latent, it was not explicit, and therefore was not being driven through our business and work processes, particularly in admissions, right? The whole selection part of culture management. And then we looked out at the great enterprises of the world, the great firms of the world, and all of them were being profoundly intentional about their culture. It's like, well, what's not adding up here? Or to put it differently, this is an enormous opportunity. You don't get an opportunity like that very often. So we didn't just double down on culture. We tripled down on culture. We are pulling out all of the stops. So this is not just in the student markets. It's also part of, it's how we think about staff, hiring and developing staff. It's how all of us interact with the faculty. Now, we are not done yet. Culture setting culture is not something you do in 1, 2, or 3 years. It's not, right? This is a long cycle project. But it is bearing fruit because a lot of students will come up to me, and this was not me doing this, right? The whole organization was working on this. Jennifer Chiswick, our chief operating officer, really led this project, so I'm not standing up here saying I did this. And also, as you know, we didn't create the culture, we codified it, right? So that's one of the elements of this T-shape, right? Things like confidence without attitude. True confidence comes without attitude. And arrogance. And so it's like, look, let's play the hand. Let's get sharp in our narrative. Let's get unambiguous. Right? The world needs all kinds. There are some profoundly effective business people who have some attitude. And we started that with the word confidence for a reason. We're a business school. Bring on the strivers. We don't want to dial that down at all. But this is where we come from, and it's better that prospective applicants know that early rather than late. Okay, so part of the T-shape, part of getting intentional about what you mean by a leader, how you put it all together, is culture, and it was something we had never really done before. Okay, so that's one of the things. Here's a second one. I'll just do it very quickly because I think Rajiv Ball and some others and some of the other speakers may touch on this. But we introduced a core course, a required course in what we called problem framing. So this is distinctive. This is really a distinctive part of our curriculum. And business leaders were saying to me, that's one of the most fun parts of my job is I get to talk to people in really interesting places and we talk about great stuff. It's part of when I think about tweeting, I'm constantly trying to think, with attribution, of course, what was the neatest idea I heard yesterday? And because I want to share it. And so this problem framing, CEOs were saying to me, not just CEOs, lots of business leaders were saying, Rich, we will always need problem solvers. We will always need them. Business schools are pretty good at attracting and delivering on that. But what we really need are people that are thinking in a more systematic way further upstream at the problem finding and problem framing stages. How good are you at problem definition? Maybe more importantly, can you get better? What does that toolkit look like? And so we built a course around that. And, just as a very, very quick example, right? When people say think outside the box, and we all say that, it's usually not very helpful because we don't know where the box is, right? We just don't know where it is. If I knew where it was, I would be happy to think outside of it. I would, I swear. But part of it is we make implicit assumptions when we address any problem, but they're often unconscious and implicit. And if you can get yourself to be systematic about making them explicit, then you can ask yourself, is that really true? Is that assumption really true? Think of the assumption as the side of the box. Because if that's not true, then the wall of the box is over here. And a bunch of potential solutions I would not have considered become admissible. I'm oversimplifying a bit, but you get the idea, right? And that's a real strong habit of mine because we make lots of implicit assumptions that in fact frame what we're doing. So part of why this class is hard for our students is because I'm an analytical type. I tend to be analytical, and I think most of you do too. Most of our MBAs are, I think, which is a good thing. Most people that are like me, you show them a problem, they want to go to the solution, right? It's, yeah, let's go. And part of this course is to say, is that the right question? Is that the right problem? So they talk about divergent thinking. Can you dial back or dial out and look at this question or problem in a wider context and ask, is it the right one? That's uncomfortable for people that tend to be very analytical. It's like come on, let's get on with it. Let's go. Okay. So that's another part of this, again, the horizontal segment in the T-shape. People that are not just thinkers. We've always attracted thinkers. But thinkers can also be very convergent and analytical, and bang, I get to solutions very quickly. Part of being really good at this integrative or horizontal leadership dimension of how we develop our students is being a great thinker, but also somebody who can step back and use the tools in a systematic way to get better at problem framing. It's a neat course. So if there's one piece of our new curriculum that I'd love to give all of you, and I hope to be able to do this soon, it is a booster shot in an area like problem framing. It's like, how, if we could digitally give you 2 hours of experience of what that class is like, that'd be kind of cool, right? So that gives me a transition into my third trend. Third trend, I'm going to be brief on this. It's not a brief topic, but I'm going to be brief on it, and then we'll just go to Q&A because I've got about 10 minutes left. So online digital. Job one for me, I get this. Don't undermine the reputation of this place, okay? Please don't do that. There are a lot of silly things as dean I could do that would undermine what for generations has been built up, our reputation, our brand, our identity as a school. That's very important. At the same time, I mentioned that there's a lot of hype out there. There is a lot of lower quality stuff out there. The high quality stuff I have now sampled, as has our school. We've done some pilot courses. It's really interesting. The synchronously delivered stuff by faculty members on the screen. I'll tell you an example. One of the students who took one of these synchronously delivered online classes, 100% online classes, it was a pilot for us. The student said, Rich, she was actually making a presentation in front of a bunch of people. I'd never heard her say this. She said, you don't understand. When you are having a case discussion online with the faculty on there, your picture is on the screen. Everybody can see whether you're paying attention or not. She was saying, you couldn't look away. I mean, I found it was just like I was totally in it in a way that in a classroom discussion, you can be a little bit passive, right? And you can speak or not speak. It was sort of like, wow. And so I thought, I'd never thought about that. I've never been in a synchronous digital case discussion. These are the little things. Another thing somebody said to me is, Rich, our faculty are so good at teaching. So often when they stumble, though, they stumble because their course is poorly organized. And this person said, organization of courses is easy to get right in the digital world, right? It's mapped out. Here are the problem sets, here are the readings, here's the that all needs to get done in advance. And in fact, it's often not done by the instructor. It's done by a professional in course management and design. It's like a division of labor. It's like, my God, it makes me think about if I could just get a course designer, like leave the digital world alone. We're in the traditional world. I get a course designer to solve the course management problem for all these faculty that are stumbling. It's like, why didn't I think about that a long time ago? The digital world is teaching us things we didn't realize it would teach us. And it's coming at us very quickly. So I mentioned last night, for those of you that were there last night, there are 11,000 degree granting institutions of management education around the world. 1% of those is still 100. If you're in the top 100 business schools in the world, you're in right? That's 1%. A lot of those, though, are going to get not just business schools, but universities. There are 4,500 institutions of higher learning in the U.S., and at least half of those survive, because they have physical proximity to people, to their market, local. If and when things go largely digital, the local factor disappears. And their raison d'etre, right, their competitive survival is going to disappear. So there's going to be consolidation and all the usual things that we see in industries. That's coming really quickly. It's exciting. Let me take a few questions, because I know we've got about 5 minutes. I'd love to take some questions rather than just yap at you. But as you can tell, I'm very excited about where we are. There's some really big things going on. And thankfully, because people have been supporting us financially and because prices have gone up and lots of other reasons, we have a financial model that is allowing us to win the big battles out there in the marketplace. Richard, I know you have a question. Okay.
And you say the local disappears.
Yeah.
And I just wonder whether that's exactly right, is whether the local changes rather than disappears. And one of the things that struck me with the development of the MOOCs.
There's a microphone there if you wouldn't mind grabbing.
One of the things that struck me with the development of the MOOCs is the potential for the development of a model that draws on what's publicly available and is essentially a tutoring-based model.
Yeah.
And you see that, of course, in other areas of education. Because the one, the value that comes with a degree awarding institution is its reputation and the fact that you have got accredited by that organization. But
Yep.
I could well see that in the future, somebody who set up a tutoring-based organization that they operated with integrity could actually have the potential on a small scale to establish a reputation
Yeah.
with business in terms of what they could deliver. So I think
I agree.
there's many different dimensions to this.
I agree. So thank you for that. You know, and I think we are going to see that. The whole so-called flipped classroom, just very quickly, and he mentioned MOOCs, these massive open online courses and so forth. These are an important part of this revolution. I think it's fair to call it that. And so the flipped classroom is the simple idea that, you know, you and I, when we went to school, right, we went to school for the lecture and then we went home to do the homework. And the flipped classroom says, no, no, no. You do the lecture, video, electronically at home. And you go into school to do the applied work, the case discussion, the grapple with the material part of it, the homework, or if you will, right? And that's happening in K through 12 education, kindergarten through 12th grade, as well as higher education. But I think part of it is, if I am a local university with legacy assets that are in place and expensive and designed to do sage on the stage type stuff, and now somebody says, just convert yourself to a tutoring organization, that's a hard transition. Some of them will achieve that, and I think they must. That's a really hard transition. And so what we see in a lot of private schools in the U.S. that don't make it, and here I'm sure in Europe and elsewhere. So a charter school, they will go out of business. The facilities are there. A charter school will come in and connect to the public sector or other things, or many different models. But I think there needs to be organizational transformation, at least in many cases. Another couple of questions, please. Thanks. Here's a microphone if you wouldn't mind. Thanks.
I guess the real question for me, I'm very passionate about culture, very passionate about values, vision, missions. It's something that I do in my daily job. I didn't go to Cal, my wife did, as you know. Everybody talks about they went to Cal. You talk about digitization.
Yeah.
You talk about online learning, distance learning. I don't have the ability to say I went to.
Yeah.
I studied through the Open University.
Interesting.
The distance learning university. How do you embed a culture when you don't go to, but you study through?
That's all the time we have. Thanks very much for coming. When people ask me, what are the deep differentiators of this wonderful school? I usually answer exactly the same way, and I answer using the words that are in our strategic plan. It's about place. Right, the San Francisco Silicon Valley ecosystem that is the envy of the world. It just is. It's different. It's about people, as it always is, but that ecosystem attracts a different sort of person. And it's about culture, place, people, and culture. And to a first approximation, admittedly a loose one, digital education doesn't have any one of those three things, at least not the way we normally think about it. So whatever we do in this digital space needs to encode as much place, people, and culture as we possibly can. So we've been thinking hard about what does that mean, what does that look like. So no matter what we do, if we were to do a largely online digital degree program, we would have to make sure we're bringing people to San Francisco, Silicon Valley, Berkeley. We would have to make sure they spend some time there, that they see what Skydeck looks like. And on the culture front, there are other elements of what we need to do, right? Because things can be digital, but then things can happen in a distributed way, right? So we can get people doing a digital program in Berkeley who live in London to connect face-to-face with our people in London. And then we'd have to think about how does culture transmission work if it's working at least in part through a mechanism like that. So we have not answered your question yet, but we're thinking very hard about it, right? Because if we go to a world that doesn't load on the stuff that makes us distinctive, then we might not win. The one thing that I would put on the table, though, is we do have a global super brand behind us in Berkeley. Go to Sao Paulo, go to Shanghai. Global super brand. That is a recipe. If we get it right, for massive market share capture as this revolution happens. Not at a lower quality level. We would never lower our admission standards. We could lower or even increase our admission standards and have twice as many degree program students in 10 years as we do today. That's a future we're trying to get our arms around. Thanks very much. Thanks.